Overnight, a steel giant rose on Michael Stenson's ranch. Unauthorized, unexplained. Locals called it a storage site, but when the creek soured and unmarked trucks rolled in after dark, he knew something was wrong. What he uncovered would ignite a war between one man and a buried empire.
When I pulled up to the edge of my ranch after 5 days on the road, I had no reason to expect anything other than silence, open sky, and the sweet stink of horses and diesel. But the moment I saw that structure, gray, angular, sterile, and definitely not mine, sitting on the far north corner of my property, I damn near slammed the brakes hard enough to rip the axle out. I parked the truck in a cloud of gravel dust, killed the engine, and just sat there for a second, staring through the windshield like the building might disappear if I blinked long enough. It didn't. Instead, a forklift rolled out of the open hangar bay doors and zipped off behind the structure like it owned the place. My land, my ranch, my silence, all violated in concrete and steel. It wasn't just the building. There were men, too. Hard hats, orange vests, radios on their belts. One of them waved lazily when he saw me, like I was just another delivery driver rolling up with lunch. I climbed out of the truck slowly, stretched my back, and walked up with that same stride I used to use when interrogating someone I knew was already lying. "Can I help you?" I asked, real calm. The foreman type looked up from a clipboard, gave me a once-over. Mid-40s, maybe. Gut like a beer barrel. "You must be Mr. Stenson." "That's right." "Yeah. We were told the landowner might swing by. No worries. This is just a temporary logistics structure. Warehouse space, mainly. Equipment storage." I stared at him, then looked past him to the half-finished building. Steel walls bolted into concrete. Not a single permit sign. Nothing temporary about it. "And who exactly gave you permission to build this temporary warehouse on my damn property?" He chuckled like I'd just told a joke he didn't quite get. "That'd be the county zoning office. You can check with them. It's probably a mapping issue. Parcel registry had this tract marked as part of the adjacent development. They said it's under municipal jurisdiction now." "No, it's not," I said. "It's mine. Been mine for 17 years. And before that, my uncle's. I've got the deed, the plat, the tax history. Hell, I've got the barbed wire scars on my hands from mending every inch of that fence line." He gave a helpless shrug, like he'd just been handed blueprints and a paycheck. I turned without another word and walked the perimeter of the hangar. The ground was churned up. Bulldozer tracks, gravel spread, crushed grass. Someone had bulldozed my wildflowers flat and left tire tracks down to the creek bed. Bastards didn't even pretend to care. I drove straight into town and put in a call to the zoning office. The girl on the line sounded about 19 and utterly indifferent. "Says here that portion was rezoned for light industrial 5 months ago. Parcel ID A to D. Looks like it's under a temporary lease pending final review." "Lease to who?" "Corvex Logistics, LLC." Of course it was. Corvex. That name had floated around the county before. Some high-volume transportation and warehousing company that moved fast and kept their name off the buildings. No locals, all out-of-state suits and contractors. I'd heard stories of them bidding on land all over the place, always through shell companies. I'd also heard rumors about what they were storing in those buildings. I hung up and drove home in a mood somewhere between boiling and volcanic. Pulled out my deed, the topo map. Even the old survey from when I paid to have the boundaries laser confirmed 2 years back. Everything checked out. That building was planted dead center in my northwest pasture, and no one had even bothered to tell me. Next morning, I took all that paperwork straight to the Homeowners Association office. I knew damn well my property wasn't part of their jurisdiction, but I wanted to see what they'd say. The HOA's office was a refurbished community center with fresh paint and that smell of stale coffee and fresh pretension. The sign on the door read, Ronald S. Simons, HOA President. Simons met me with a politician's smile and outstretched hand, the kind of grin that makes you want to count your fingers afterward. Michael, I heard you were back. Listen, about the construction, just a mix-up, I'm sure. We're coordinating with Corvex on some regional infrastructure improvements. Nothing permanent. You know it's on my land. He tilted his head like a man feigning surprise in a courtroom. Now, Michael, let's not get dramatic. The maps are unclear. The company's got temporary rights while we clarify boundaries. Nothing shady. It's all above board. I don't remember leasing anything to Corvex. You got a contract I supposedly signed? Of course not, he said too quickly. But these things have a way of working themselves out, long as no one makes trouble. There it was, the implied threat, wrapped in a smile. I left before I decided to test whether HOA bylaws still applied if you punched the president square in the nose. That night, I walked the pasture. The stars were out, the crickets loud, and something hung in the air that didn't belong. Not manure, not diesel. Chemical, synthetic. I followed it down to the creek, where the reeds looked limp and yellow. My boots sank into the ground more than they should have. The whole patch felt wrong. I stood there a long while in the dark, staring at that silent gray building glowing faint under the moonlight. I didn't know what they were doing in there. Not yet. But I knew it wasn't just warehouse storage. And I knew I'd just stepped into a fight I hadn't asked for. But sure as hell wasn't backing down from. I slept like hell that night. Not because of fear. Fear had burned out of me decades ago. But because my brain wouldn't shut up. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that warehouse squatting on my pasture like a concrete tumor. By sunrise, I was already dressed, coffee gone cold in my hand, staring at maps spread across my kitchen table. Deeds, surveys, tax records. Everything said the same thing. They were trespassing, and they were counting on me being either stupid or tired enough to let it slide. I wasn't either. By mid-morning, I pulled my old drone case out of the storage room. I hadn't used it much since retirement, mostly for checking fence lines and chasing off bored teenagers with too much curiosity. I calibrated it carefully, swapped batteries, and launched it from behind the barn, keeping it low until it cleared the tree line. Once it was up, I sent it north toward the warehouse. What I saw made my jaw tighten. The place was busier than it had any right to be. Trucks came and went in timed intervals, never more than one at a time. No company logos, no plates I recognized. The drone camera zoomed in as a flatbed backed up to the loading bay. Men rolled out metal barrels, dark blue with hazard markings stamped on the sides. Not equipment, not tools. Barrels didn't get unloaded that carefully unless someone was afraid of spilling whatever was inside. The real kicker came when the drone followed one of the forklifts past the rear of the building. Behind the warehouse, the ground had been freshly disturbed. Trenches. Covered over, but not enough to hide the lines. Someone was burying something. I brought the drone back, saved the footage in 3 separate places, and made a call to the county sheriff. I didn't expect miracles, but I did expect someone to at least pretend to care. 2 hours later, a deputy I'd never met before rolled up, took a cursory look, and shrugged. "Looks like a zoning dispute, Mr. Stenson. Civil matter." I showed him the footage. He watched it once, then again, slower. "You got proof that's hazardous material?" "No," I said. but I've got proof it doesn't belong on my land." He handed the tablet back like it burned. I'd talked to a lawyer. That was the moment I knew local help wasn't coming. That night, the threats started. I was halfway through dinner when headlights swept across my living room wall. An engine idled outside my gate longer than it should have. I stepped onto the porch, hand resting casually near the doorframe where my shotgun usually leaned. A black SUV sat just beyond the fence line. Window cracked. A voice drifted out, calm and practiced. "You seem like a smart man, Mr. Stenson. Smart men don't dig where they don't have to." I didn't answer. Silence unnerves people like that more than shouting ever could. The SUV rolled off slow, tires crunching gravel like punctuation. The next morning, I found my fence cut near the creek. Clean slice. Deliberate. Not vandalism. A message. That was when I made the call I'd been avoiding. Johnny Coleman answered on the second ring. Same gravelly voice, same dry humor. "If this is about fishing, I'm busy. If it's about trouble, I'm listening." "Trouble," I said. "Corporate. Smells toxic." He laughed once. "It always does. Send me what you have." By evening, he was already pulling threads. Corporate registrations, shell companies, property transfers that didn't quite line up. Corvex logistics wasn't just big. They were slippery. Paper trails led to subsidiaries that folded as soon as anyone looked too closely. Warehouses popped up where zoning mysteriously changed overnight. Meanwhile, the activity on my land intensified. Trucks came later now, closer to midnight. The smell near the creek got sharper, like burned plastic mixed with something metallic. The grass along the waterline turned brittle, crunching under my boots. Whatever they were storing, it wasn't meant to see daylight. I installed more cameras, motion sensors, floodlights. If they wanted to scare me off, they'd picked the wrong ranch. Late that night, Johnny called back. His tone had shifted. "This isn't just logistics," he said. "Corvex has a history. Quiet settlements, environmental complaints that disappear. And I found something else." "Go on." "There's a transportation subcontractor tied to the warehouse. Local driver. Young guy. Name's not important yet, but he's nervous. And nervous people talk." I stared out the window toward the dark outline of the warehouse, its lights burning long past any reasonable business hour. "Let me know when he does," I said. I hung up, poured myself a drink I hadn't planned on having, and watched the night swallow my land inch by inch. Whatever Corvex had brought onto my ranch, it wasn't going to stay buried. Not if I had anything to say about it. Johnny didn't like the word leverage, but he damn well knew how to find it. By the time he showed up at my ranch 3 days later, dust trailing behind his old Dodge like a comet tail, he had that look in his eye I remembered from the old days, the one he got right before kicking over a hornet's nest with a steel-toed boot. He stepped out, lit a cigarette before saying hello, and tossed a manila folder onto my porch table. "Meet A.H.," he said. I flipped it open. A driver's license, employment record, and a photo taken from a distance. Young guy, early 20s, baseball cap pulled low, loading barrels onto a trailer under floodlights. Name's Adam Hale. Drives night shift for a subcontractor that works exclusively with Corvex. No paper trail. Cash bonuses under the table. He's been hauling chemical drums out of warehouses from here to Houston. "Why talk now?" Johnny flicked ash into my flower pot. "Because his conscience finally caught up with him. And maybe," he added with a sly grin, "because his old man's got a seat on the HOA board, and he's sick of watching the bastard cash bribes while lecturing him about responsibility." That caught me off guard. "Wait, which one?" Johnny raised an eyebrow. "Ted Hale, your friendly neighborhood HOA treasurer. The same guy who tried to fine you $500 2 years ago for having an unauthorized chicken coop. Those were turkeys, I muttered. Details. I let that sink in. One of their own kids breaking rank. That was the first real crack in their armor. Johnny arranged the meeting the next night. Adam insisted on neutral ground, so we met in the back of an all-night diner just off the highway. He showed up jittery, eyes scanning every corner like we were in a spy movie. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Thanks for coming," I said, sliding him a cup of coffee before he sat. "Johnny says you've got something important." Adam nodded, but didn't speak at first, just stared at his hands. Then he exhaled and said, "I didn't know at first. I thought it was just storage. I needed the work. They paid cash. No questions. Then, one night, a barrel cracked." He looked up. It hissed when it hit the ground. The label had been scratched off, but I could still see the original imprint. "Hazardous waste, Class D. You know what that is?" "Explosive solvents," I said. "Byproducts from industrial plastic production." Adam nodded. "And we were burying them. Not storing. Burying." I didn't want to believe it, but the next day I checked the manifest logs. Half of them were falsified. They had my signature on them. I never saw those loads. "You still have those files?" I asked. He reached into his coat and handed over a USB. Everything I could copy without getting caught. Locations, times, shipping manifests, even a few internal memos. I emailed myself screenshots from the supervisor's laptop when he stepped away to smoke. Johnny gave a low whistle. "That'll do." But Adam wasn't done. He leaned in, voice lowering. "You want to know the worst part? My dad, he's been approving permits for those sites. Backdated HOA documents, faked signatures. They run it through community improvement initiatives to make it look like infrastructure work. That warehouse on your land? They submitted it as a utility storage facility for storm relief." I stared at him. "And the county bought that?" "They didn't have to," he said. "They got paid not to look." He looked ashamed, angry, and scared all at once. I didn't want to be part of this. I tried to quit last month. The next night, my car window got smashed. My dog went missing. Dad told me, "Just let it go." "Some fights aren't worth it," he said. That's when I knew I had to find someone who'd actually do something. I nodded slowly. "You came to the right place." We left the diner separately. Johnny took the drive to offload the files on a clean system. I went back to the ranch and sat in the dark for a long time. Outside, the night buzzed with cicadas and the low hum of the distant generator behind that warehouse. I could smell the faint trace of chemicals in the air again, faint but distinct, like the earth itself was trying to whisper that something ugly had been forced down its throat. I now had evidence, names, dates, motive, and most importantly, confirmation that this wasn't just some corporate sloppiness. This was a damn cover-up, and it ran deeper than anyone wanted to admit. I didn't sleep the night we got the files from Adam. Part of me wanted to kick into action immediately. Send everything to the press. Call every regulator in the state. March into the warehouse with a goddamn bullhorn. But Johnny talked me down. We go loud. We go smart. Chain of custody. Backup plans. Contingencies. He wasn't wrong. Too many people had already looked away. If we wanted anyone to take this seriously, we had to come in with more than USB sticks and righteous fury. So we started building our case like a damn war plan. Johnny duplicated the data onto encrypted drives and stored them in 3 separate locations, including one in a church Dropbox we jokingly called Sanctuary Server. I reached out to every environmental watchdog group I could think of. Most didn't respond. One did. Clean Earth now. They were scrappy, media-savvy, and, more importantly, they weren't afraid of lawsuits. I sent them a package: drone footage, barrel manifests, a sworn letter from Adam under a pseudonym. Within 24 hours, they called me back. "We want to help, but if we're going in, we go big." They meant press, news vans, microphones, a goddamn field day. I didn't hesitate. We picked a Sunday morning. No construction, no activity. Clean Earth brought their camera crew, 2 scientists in lab coats, and a media liaison named Jen, who moved like she ran on pure caffeine and spite. I set up a folding table at the edge of the pasture, where the warehouse loomed in the background. Behind us, the creek flowed low and sickly, reeds brown and leaning. I held the gate open while the news teams rolled in, one after another, parking on the road shoulder like vultures around a carcass. Jen started the press conference like she'd done it 100 times, which she probably had. "Good morning. We're standing on the private property of Michael Stenson, where a logistics company known as Corvex has constructed an unpermitted storage facility for industrial waste on land they do not own. What we have here is not a zoning mistake. It is a coordinated violation of environmental law, aided by systemic negligence, or worse, by local authorities and the HOA board." She handed it over to me with a nod. I stepped up to the mic. I wasn't nervous, but it felt strange, speaking publicly again. It had been years since I'd faced anything but cattle, coyotes, and the occasional code inspector. "My name is Michael Stenson. I served 23 years in law enforcement, another 15 running this ranch. I've dealt with criminals of every shape and size, but I've never seen anything this brazen. They didn't just build on my land. They buried hazardous waste in my soil. They poisoned my water. They lied, forged, and threatened anyone who asked questions." I held up a printed still frame from the drone footage, those barrels being rolled into the trench. "This is not an accident. This is an operation." The questions came fast, mostly from reporters, a few from Clean Earth's lawyers. "Have you contacted the EPA?" "Yes." "Response?" "Pending." "Has the HOA responded?" "They've denied involvement, but we have documents that say otherwise." That was Johnny's cue. He stepped forward and handed out a packet to each press rep: copies of falsified permits, scanned emails, and a screenshot of an HOA budget entry labeled Infrastructure Support Initiative, Phase B. The address on the invoice? My ranch. I watched their eyes widen, heard the scribbling of pens. We wrapped the event in under 40 minutes. Clean Earth uploaded the footage before lunch. It was on local news by evening. Corvex tried to issue a statement through a PR firm, vague language about misunderstandings and shared utility partnerships. It didn't stick, because by then, the EPA couldn't ignore it anymore. They sent a team out that week: hazmat suits, soil samplers, portable air quality monitors. I watched from my porch as they scraped dirt near the creek, one of them shaking his head the moment his reader beeped. That same night, I got a visit I wasn't expecting. Someone tried to burn my barn down. I heard the pop of glass around 1 in the morning, stepped out with my shotgun in hand, and caught the flicker of flames licking the east wall of the hayloft. It wasn't a big blaze, not yet. I put it out with 2 extinguishers and a 5-gallon bucket, but it was enough to know it wasn't random. The ground outside was slick with gasoline. The igniter? A rag-wrapped brick soaked in kerosene. Sheriff's deputies showed up, took pictures, asked all the right questions, but their eyes told me what I already knew. No suspects, no follow-up. Paperwork and silence. I called Johnny. "They're scared," he said. "Good," I replied. "Let's make them terrified." The next day, the EPA posted a notice on the warehouse gate. Site under federal review. Do not enter. The building went dark for the first time in weeks, but I knew better than to think they were giving up. They were just changing tactics. They filed the lawsuit the following Monday. Not against Corvex. Not against the HOA. Against me. Defamation. Trespassing. Interference with commercial operations. I read the complaint 3 times, then tossed it onto the table like it stank. Johnny just whistled and cracked a beer. Classic move, he said. Shift the spotlight. Put you on the defensive. Smear your credibility before the real trial even starts. I didn't answer. I was too busy watching the name printed at the bottom of the complaint. Zander and Crown LLP. The most expensive pack of legal wolves money could buy in the state of Texas. But it didn't matter. Because they were already too late. EPA had locked down the warehouse. The Department of Environmental Quality confirmed soil contamination consistent with improper hazardous waste storage. Clean Earth's footage had gone viral. I even got a call from a late-night show host asking if I'd be willing to reenact the barrel discovery for television. I passed. Instead, I prepped for the real fight. My lawyer, Sandra Mendoza, had the personality of a steel trap and the patience of a vulture circling a dying cow. She filed our countersuit that same week. Stenson vs. Corvex Logistics and the Briar Creek HOA, alleging environmental violations, fraud, conspiracy, and criminal trespass. And then, the subpoenas started flying. Discovery unearthed everything Adam had hinted at and more. Emails between Corvex executives and HOA board members outlining quiet coordination on non-disruptive waste handling zones, draft contracts with forged community approval signatures, expense reports labeled zoning facilitation paid out to a consulting firm that didn't even have a real office. We didn't even have to dig for the nail in the coffin. It arrived by accident. An internal recording from a Zoom call, forwarded anonymously to Sandra's office, captured the CEO of Corvex, Martin Langford, saying the quiet part out loud. The HOA's got it handled. We drop, bury, and we're gone before some old farmer figures out which way the wind's blowing. I nearly broke the chair when I heard it. By the time the trial started, the courthouse was surrounded by reporters and protesters. People held up signs that read, "Don't bury the truth," and "Keep Texas clean." I walked in wearing my cleanest boots and a suit that hadn't seen daylight since my brother's funeral. Langford showed up, flanked by lawyers and cologne, trying to look unbothered. Ted Hale didn't even show. Coward hid behind a medical waiver and Zoom testimony. Ron Simons, the smug bastard himself, sat 3 rows behind the defense table, flanked by 2 HOA board members who looked like they hadn't blinked in weeks. The courtroom had barely settled when Sandra played the drone footage. Barrel after barrel being offloaded, buried, covered. The judge raised an eyebrow. Langford's lawyer objected, "Circumstantial." The judge overruled him with a grunt. Then came the manifests, the forged permits, the HOA budgets with fake community improvement line items. But the moment that locked the jury came when Adam walked in. He'd decided to testify publicly. He wore a suit that didn't fit and hands that couldn't stop shaking. But when he looked at the jury and said, "I watched them poison that land, and my own father helped them cover it up," you could feel the oxygen leave the room. Sandra walked him through every shipment, every falsified form, every whispered threat. And when Langford's lawyers tried to cross-examine, Adam just stared them down and said, "I'm not scared of you anymore." I gave my own testimony the next day. I talked about the land, about my uncle's bones buried out past the cottonwood tree, about the cattle I had to sell off when the water turned, I didn't cry. I didn't need to. When I finished, the judge looked down at Langford like a man deciding whether to put down a sick dog. Sandra's closing argument was surgical. Corvex Logistics and the Briar Creek HOA thought this land was empty, that its owner was too old, too isolated, too local to matter. But Mr. Stenson didn't just stand up for himself. He stood up for the law, for the land, for the truth. This wasn't a mistake. This was a crime. We won. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Verdict: guilty on all counts. Damages awarded: $1,500,000. Mandatory environmental remediation. Revocation of Corvex's state business license. Full forensic audit of HOA finances with criminal referrals for both Simons and Ted Hale. The courtroom didn't explode in applause. It didn't have to. The silence said it all. Langford didn't look at me on the way out. Simons did. He held my gaze just long enough to show the cracks forming in his little empire. Good. Let it crumble. I thought the hard part was over. Silly me. 3 weeks after the verdict, I was out by the South Field, helping a rescue crew clear brush for the soil restoration teams. The sky was finally blue. The air no longer smelled like burning solvents, and the birds had started coming back. For the first time in months, the ranch felt like mine again. Then Sandra called. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "You're being sued again." I didn't say anything, just waited. This time, it's not Corvex. It's their investors. They're filing a motion in federal court to nullify your compensation on the grounds of reputational sabotage and economic interference. I let that hang in the air for a second. "Let me guess," I said. "They hired fancier suits?" Zander and Crown, again. Plus a DC firm that specializes in federal asset disputes. They're going for the long game now. If they can't shut you up, they'll bleed you dry in court. For a second, I wanted to laugh. After everything we'd exposed, buried waste, forged permits, witness threats, now the victim was being accused of hurting them. Sandra didn't laugh either. "They want to make an example of you, show every other landowner in this country what happens when you go too far off script." That night, Johnny and I sat on the porch with the case file between us, a bottle of rye between that, and the cold kind of silence that comes when you realize a battle you thought was over is just a warm-up. "They're not suing to win," Johnny said. "They're suing to exhaust. You've got your money, your land, your name in the papers. Now they want to bury you in motions, appeals, and depositions until you either go broke or break." "Well," I said, "they picked the wrong damn stubborn mule." We took it federal. The case moved to Austin. Bigger courthouse, stiffer suits, fewer smiles. This wasn't a local jury or a small-town judge. This was federal litigation, and the room reeked of power perfume and gold cufflinks. The plaintiffs, officially Corvex Capital Investment Group, claimed my actions caused a catastrophic market disruption, including the collapse of Corvex Logistics' valuation and the loss of millions in investor trust. They accused me of defamation, unlawful surveillance, and public manipulation of regulatory channels. I nearly choked on my coffee when I read that last one. So exposing an illegal toxic dump on my own land was now manipulation. Cute. Sandra tore into them like a chainsaw through dry pine. She filed a countersuit for malicious prosecution, submitted our prior court victory into evidence, and, just for good measure, motioned for a RICO-level federal review of Corvex Capital itself. Conspiracy to suppress environmental violations, fraud, and corporate coercion, she told the judge. This isn't just about one man. This is about corporate criminality being protected through shell litigation. But the move that turned the tide came again. From Johnny. He tracked down an internal Slack message log from one of the hedge fund analysts at Corvex Capital. It had been leaked anonymously by an intern. The logs showed how the group had known for months about the illegal dumping operations and were preparing to offload the logistics subsidiary before the EPA stepped in. One message in particular read, "If the farmer won't shut up, we drag him into federal court until he does. Once he's buried in legal fees, he'll fold like the rest." We submitted it into evidence. The courtroom went dead silent. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled. Is this what corporate defense looks like now? Dragging private citizens through federal courts for telling the truth? Corvex's lead counsel objected. The judge overruled. Twice. 2 days later, the plaintiffs dropped half their claims. Another week, and the case was dismissed with prejudice. The court ordered full enforcement of the original judgment, plus attorney fees, plus punitive damages for malicious abuse of process. Total payout revised to $1,875,000. But more importantly, the Department of Justice opened a criminal inquiry into Corvex Capital's internal operations. I didn't cheer. I didn't raise my fist. I just shook the judge's hand, looked Langford's replacement in the eye, and said, "You should have stuck to trucking." They left the courtroom flanked by 4 attorneys, pale as ghosts. Outside, Sandra handed me a check. Johnny lit a cigarette, and Adam, who came down to sit in the back row, just smiled. "I guess they picked the wrong farmer," he said. "No," I replied. "They picked the wrong land." It took almost a year, not just to get the money. That came sooner, wired to my account with the cold indifference of people who still thought they hadn't really lost. No, what took time was the land. Corvex left behind more than buried drums and scorched earth. They left poison in the soil, distrust in the air, and a sour taste in the mouths of everyone who used to wave to me from their porches. Some of those neighbors had sat on HOA boards. Some had known. Some claimed they didn't. I didn't waste time sorting them. I spent that year turning rot into renewal. The first thing I did was tear down the warehouse myself. Didn't hire contractors. Didn't wait for the county. I took a rented excavator and crushed the damn place one steel beam at a time. It was cathartic in the way you only feel when you're personally erasing something that tried to erase you first. Then came the cleanup, the state-funded part of it. The rest, I paid for myself, because I wanted it done right. The EPA teams cleared the topsoil, removed the contaminated sediment near the creek, planted erosion nets, and seeded native grass. The water started flowing cleaner. Frogs came back. Birds. Even the feral cats returned, like they'd been watching and waiting for the verdict before moving in. That winter, I made a decision. The payout was more than I'd ever expected. I could have gone anywhere, retired for real. But I didn't want to leave this land. I wanted to rebuild it, on my terms. So I founded something new, Bright Prairie Initiative. It wasn't flashy, just a nonprofit with one goal: turn poisoned land into energy, clean energy. We partnered with a solar startup out of Austin, bought rows of panels, and turned the northern pasture, the same one Corvex had defiled, into a 5-acre solar farm feeding clean power into the local grid. Guess who joined the team? Adam. He showed up with calloused hands, a toolbox, and a resolve I didn't expect in someone his age. Said he wanted to learn something real. Said he wanted to earn something honest. I didn't say much, just handed him gloves and pointed to the next array. Johnny stuck around, too. Technically as a consultant, though really he just liked drinking coffee and harassing the electricians. Sandra visited once during ribbon cutting and gave the most awkward speech I've ever seen a lawyer attempt. I don't think she even realized she smiled until it was over. The HOA dead. After the audits, the board was dissolved. New elections were held. Ron Simons pleaded out on fraud charges and is currently enjoying community service at a local trash sorting facility. Ted Hale vanished into another state. The HOA was replaced with a resident council. Less power, more transparency. Nobody sends me fines anymore. Nobody dares. The press still calls sometimes. I let most of it go to voicemail. One day, some producer floated the idea of turning the story into a limited series. I told him it was already too long and too damn real. But we did have a celebration. First summer after the panels went live, we held a cookout under the new pavilion, right at the edge of the pasture. Neighbors came, real ones, old-timers, families with kids, even a few who once sat on the wrong side of that courtroom. I didn't care. Not anymore. Adam grilled. Johnny ran the cornhole bracket with military precision. I just sat on the porch with a glass of lemonade and watched people laugh. At one point, a kid, maybe 7 years old, ran up to the sign at the edge of the field. Bold white letters on a wood slab we carved ourselves. It read, "This land speaks truth." He asked his dad what it meant. The man smiled and pointed toward me. I didn't hear what he said, didn't need to. The sun dipped low over the rows of panels, casting long gold shadows across a pasture that had once held darkness. Now it hummed with light.